What up, Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and I'm back with another episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. I'm joined by your favorite beat reporter, Chris Fedor. Chris, what's going on, my guy? How are you doing today?
Ethan, man, I'm great. I've got a new flavor of bubbly, sparkling water that I'm trying, and it's a beautiful day outside. I was able to remove the rest of my tree, so things are looking up.
No more trade drama. We love to see it. Love to see it. And Chris, obviously, had to get it in there.
Strawberry sunset. I don't know how it is. We'll find out.
To be decided by the end of the podcast. We'll get a full review from Chris on the bubbly sparkling water. But I think the first thing that I wanted to talk about on today's podcast was the potential for Kenny Atkinson, who's returning from the French national team, to come back and decide what he wants to do with the final decisions on this roster. Right? Isaac Okoro, qualifying offer, filling in a couple two-way spots that still have not been officially decided yet, even though we know they're probably headed in one of two ways for both of those contracts. And the potential to figure out who's going to get that third and final two-way contract, or if they're going to sign somebody to a full-time roster spot. So, obviously, talking about Luke Travers, Imani Bates, Pete Nance. And then there's also this guy that we got to see on the Olympic stage during the 2024 Paris Olympic Games. He posterized LeBron James, went viral on social media. Guerschon Yabusele. I mean, he is a guy who is 6'8", 275, has played in the NBA before, played 2 years with the Boston Celtics. His numbers weren't all that great because he obviously wasn't getting minutes, but he's a guy that fits in that two-way kind of position, also being able to play on both ends of the floor. Obviously, he's got some bounce to jump over LeBron James, even though he was taking the charge. But I think it is a good thing to talk about what he could potentially bring. Obviously, Kenny Atkinson knows him better probably than almost anybody else, as he was the coach, an assistant coach of that national team. Chris, what do you think about the potential for the Cavs bringing on this guy?
Can we really call it a poster if the guy doesn't go up to challenge the shot? I mean, LeBron didn't even try to block it. He went for the charge. Is that still a poster? Is that still posterizing somebody? I don't know the right terminology for that.
I guess you're
we'll
right.
Call it that.
I think you're right. I don't think it's an actual poster when it comes to getting dunked on. I just think anytime somebody, I mean, Jason Tatum's dunk over LeBron James was definitely a poster, but this one was more so of a charge kind of situation. But
I mean, it was incredible to see somebody with that size have that kind of athleticism, speed to go down the baseline, and the hops to finish over the top of LeBron as LeBron was trying to take a charge. There's a reason why they call Yabusele the dancing bear, obviously, because he's big, he's strong, he's physical, he can play that kind of game, but he's also nimble, agile, he can switch on to smaller guys and stuff like that. So I certainly think there's intrigue, but there are a couple of hurdles here, and this is something that we brought up in the podcast last week, I want to say, before a bunch of other people picked up on it and started to run with it with their own sourcing. But he's got a $2.5 million buyout reportedly. So any team that wants to buy him out of his contract from Real Madrid, they've got to believe that he's going to be worth it. And they got to believe that he's going to have, a pretty prominent role. Otherwise, are you really going to pay that kind of money to buy him out and then turn around and give him the kind of contract that would be required to bring him to the United States and make him feel like it's worth it to come to the United States? So that complicates matters a little bit because I think there are legitimate questions about, is he an NBA player? What kind of role is he going to have in the NBA? What kind of opportunity is he going to have in the NBA? Or is he somebody who's just always going to play his best basketball in a national team environment, in a FIBA environment, and overseas with Real Madrid? So that complicates it a little bit, because if you're looking at it from the Cavs' perspective, What was his role be? He's going to be probably behind in terms of the depth chart. He's looked at more as a power forward than a small forward. He's looked at more as a power forward than a center. Okay, so let's examine what his role would be for the Cavs. And I totally understand the dot connecting with Kenny Atkinson and the French national team. And the Cavs have extensive scouting all across the country. And they scout guys in Australia all the time. And they scout guys in the Euro League all the time. And they have Khalifa Diop, who is playing overseas as well. So they have good intel on what's happening overseas. And they make the commitment to try and turn over every single rock to look for who it may be that would be the best fit for this team. In fact, I had a source tell me that the Cavs were taking a look, not that they were going to sign him, but they were taking a look at Bruno Caboclo while he was playing for the Brazil national team. That's the level of scouting that they do. So it would make sense that they would have an interest in Guerschon Yabusele, especially given the way that he performed for the French national team. But if we're just looking at the Cavs roster and we're trying to speak about this honestly and transparently, okay, so Evan Mobley's going to be the starting power forward. That's a given. He's going to split his time between power forward and center with Jared Allen, without Jared Allen. Beyond him, they still have Georges Niang, who is making $8 million a year, who brings a needed skill set to this team, scoring off the bench, which allowed the Cavs during the regular season last year to go from one of the worst, least productive benches in the entire NBA to middle of the pack. He was a big part of that. So he brings versatility, he brings floor spacing, he brings shooting, and he brings a little bit of scoring off the bench. Are you just going to completely ignore him when you start putting together your rotation because of the struggles that he had in the playoffs and because of the struggles that you believe he's going to continue to have in the playoffs? He was an asset for this team in the regular season. There's a reason why they signed him to the contract that they did. Now, if he gets traded, if they have other plans, then that kind of becomes a different conversation. But as of right now, it's Evan Mobley, the starting power forward, Georges Niang, the backup power forward, and then Dean Wade is also in the mix to be the backup power forward. So I just don't know, based on this current roster construction, if Cleveland is the team that would pay the $2.5 million buyout to turn around and sign Guerschon Yabusele to be the last player on the roster.
I think it's also interesting because obviously, Chris, yes, you are absolutely correct. He's more so known to play power forward, but the Cavs fandom, who have been begging for somebody of a little bit more stature, a little bit more size and athleticism at the small forward, automatically we're like, well, 6'8" can move like that, can jump like that, might be able to play a small forward position, not be undersized in a big man lineup, or depending on what you want to do, pair him with Georges Niang or Dean Wade as the 4 and have Evan Mobley, Jarrett as the 5 and put him at the 3 and stagger Max Strus's minutes that way, right? But you're absolutely correct when you talk about the contract aspects of it and how difficult that is, right? And we talked about on this podcast and in abundance of how bad the understanding of the cap space, the understanding of where the first apron is, second apron, luxury tax, all of those things, and how the Cavs don't want to go too deep into that this season or avoid it at all, if at possible, when it comes to because of how everything is set up for next season, how the money's going to change with all the extensions that they just issued. It's going to be interesting to see what, if at all, the moves Kenny Atkinson makes. And I think this is where it comes into becoming a new coach on a new system with new contracts and all those things is so difficult because you're tasked with trying to put out a team that is supposed to go from good to great. Supposed to go from middle of the pack in the Eastern Conference to the top of the pack in the Eastern Conference, right? And we understand that to be difficult with the lineup and the roster that they have. But there's going to be some controversy of whatever Kenny Atkinson does, I feel like, because everybody's going to look at it like, well, they could have made this move. They could have made this move. But, Chris, I think Kenny Atkinson coming back from the French national team and getting automatically back into the search. And even doing some research while he was in Paris and playing against all these other teams will be helpful for the Cavs going forward, because you get to see what he saw and what players, as you mentioned, they were looking at, and how that could potentially evaluate what they need for this lineup. And like we've talked about before, maybe they don't really make a big move until the trade deadline, when they have a better understanding of what they need to take this roster to the next level.
I think the other thing to consider when it comes to Yabusele is this. When you're talking about somebody who is playing overseas currently, I don't get the sense, and he doesn't come across as the guy who is desperate for an NBA opportunity. We've talked about Luke Travers a lot on this podcast, and Luke seems like a guy who just wants to be in the NBA. In some capacity, he feels like that's the next step in his career. And he wants to prove to himself and prove to others whether or not he can be an NBA player. And he was asked about it multiple times in the lead up to Summer League. Like, in your mind, when do you need to come over to the NBA before you start to say, well, I'm never going to come to the NBA. I'm just going to stay in Australia my entire career. I'm just going to play somewhere overseas my entire career. Luke is the kind of guy who feels like desperate's probably the wrong word, but there is urgency from his standpoint to get to the NBA. With Yabusele, it's not the same kind of situation, right? This is a guy who is, by all accounts, a star for Real Madrid, coming off a career high in points, rebounds. He has a big role for Real Madrid. About 24 to 25 minutes a night. And like, if you're doing that and you're accomplishing that overseas, it's not the NBA. Totally understand that it's not the NBA. But if you're that caliber player overseas and you're enjoying your time playing overseas and you're getting out of that what you want to get out of professional basketball, are you really going to leave that? Maybe. But are you really going to leave that behind to just ride the end of a bench for some team? Like, this situation here in Cleveland, it is not an opportunity for somebody to get a lot of minutes. It is not an opportunity for somebody to get consistent playing time. It's not an opportunity for somebody to get consistent touches and consistent shots. And I don't know what's in the head of Yabusele. Maybe he does look at a situation of coming to Cleveland or coming to the NBA in some capacity as just like a stepping stone or the next step in his career. But it doesn't seem like that to me. It just doesn't feel like the same kind of situation as Luke Travers. And I just don't sense a whole lot of urgency from Yabusele. It's basically like, okay, if you're going to call me and you're going to make it worth it for me to come to the NBA, and you're going to give me an opportunity that's appealing enough to come to the NBA, then I'll do it. But if not, I'm fine just staying overseas and continuing to play in the Euro League, where I'm getting consistent minutes. I'm getting consistent touches. I'm getting opportunities to play in high-level environments against some really, really good competition. And then when the summer rolls around, I can play for Team France at the World Cup or the Olympics or something along those lines. I just think in this kind of situation, I don't know that the Cavs are the most logical fit for him from an opportunity and cost standpoint. I do understand the ties to Kenny Atkinson. And this is the other thing that the Cavs have to figure out, Ethan. And this is something that the front office is going to discuss with Kenny. Okay, what do you need from the effective last roster spot? What do you want from what is effectively the last roster spot? Do you want somebody who is going to be a locker room lieutenant? Do you want somebody who's going to be an extension of the coaching staff? Do you want somebody who can help implement your offensive and defensive systems? Or are you looking for somebody that is more playable, somebody that you can get minutes out of during the regular season if certain things fall into place where you need that guy, you can trust that guy? Because the Cavs are looking at this situation saying, okay, we've got a lot of high-priced players. We've got a relatively set 8, 9, 10-man rotation, something along those lines. Playing time has to be earned, obviously, but if you're just mapping it out the best you can, you have 9, 10 playable NBA guys that you know can play NBA minutes. Um, and if you already have those, that's a really, really good feeling. And you don't have to use what is essentially the last roster spot on a guy who's going to make something more than the veterans minimum, or somebody who you're going to have to try and find opportunities for, or consistent playing time, or whatever the case may be. I just think for the Cavs, it makes more sense based on the way that everything is constructed to just find a veteran on the minimum contract that can provide playable depth, insurance, and maybe some leadership behind the scenes.
And talking more so like broad, not just about the Cavs, but we talked a little bit about Yabusele and the Paris Olympic Games and what he was able to contribute, right? And what he was able to do
Mm-hmm.
on that stage. Because sure, there are people, there are scouts that go and watch Real Madrid games and all of those different contests, but the Paris Olympic Games is being watched by everybody. It's being watched by fans, being watched by common people who don't usually watch and wanted to watch the Team USA game, whatever. And he was able to put on a spotlight for himself. So it was more so to me, less of, I think that I need to go back to the NBA, but this might be the best
Mm-hmm.
time because I'm getting the most attention from everybody around the world. And he took to social media, he took to Twitter, and he said that he's just been waiting for another opportunity. He's ready. And he's ready. And that was,
Mm-hmm.
to me, talking about coming back to the NBA. So, like you said, I don't think desperate is the right word, but I think that the timing aspect of it, because we talked about there are guys that play overseas and they just run out of time. They run out of opportunities and they run out of
Yeah.
spacing when it comes to these NBA rosters with players that don't have the opportunity to go and play in the NBA. And he's like, well, this might be my meal ticket. This might be my way back. And this might be the
Yeah.
one opportunity that I get to put my name on the map again when it comes to playing for whatever teams. And maybe that's not the Cavs in this situation when we talk about a lot of things that Chris mentioned. But I think that he wants to be back in the NBA because who doesn't, right? It's probably the most lucrative. It's probably the
Mm-hmm.
most attention based and all of those different things. But like you said, Chris, will somebody make an offer that'll make it worth it for him to make that trek? And I think that's what the difference is in this
Yeah.
situation because he's been able to in his FIBA career, right? He's played in the national team youth organization. He's played for the qualifiers, the Tokyo Olympics, and obviously the Paris Olympics. And he's only scored under in the national team senior organization, only scored under 10 points a game in one of those experiences, and that was the 2020 Tokyo Men's Olympic Basketball Tournament. He scored 6.3.
Yeah.
Every other time he has scored 13 or more points, except for one where he scored 10.8 in the FIBA Basketball World Cup in 2023. He's done a lot of experience. He's had a lot of time. And I think he's a guy that's willing to just test his mettle, right? Because he played for the Boston Celtics before. But I think it's definitely something that he's looking forward to getting back to if the opportunity arises.
Yeah, and I keep going back and forth on this because you're right. This may be the best time for him to come to the NBA because he can use what he did for France as a springboard. It's very fresh in everybody's mind. It was on a national stage against some high quality competition. But the other side of this is if you believe you're such a great player and you believe in yourself so much, then you'll continue to be one of the best players in the EuroLeague, right? That's what he is. He is one of the best players in the EuroLeague. And if you continue to play at that level, teams are smart enough. Teams do their homework. Teams are paying attention. And if you continue to be one of the best players in the EuroLeague, then this isn't your only shot. It doesn't have to be only now. You can wait for the next best opportunity. Because so much about basketball, Ethan, is about timing, it's about fit, and it's about opportunity. And do you really want to go from being one of the best players in the Euro League to essentially a cheerleader at the end of the bench in the NBA? That's something that I can't answer for him. That's something that only he can answer. But if you believe in yourself the way that it feels like he does, where he thinks he deserves an NBA shot, then this won't be his only shot. He is getting older. Obviously, that has to come into play. And he is far removed from the time that he was drafted by the Boston Celtics. And the further and further you get removed from that, maybe it feels like you're starting to get off the radar more and more and more. But if you're one of the best at a professional level, a high level of professional basketball, teams are going to be able to find you. Teams are going to come calling if they believe you're a fit for their organization, and if they believe the guy can play at the NBA level. And that's another variable to this whole thing. There are legitimate questions about whether can he play at the NBA level, or is his game better suited for the Euro League, for FIBA, for the French national team, where he has a specific role in place? And then are you going to pay nearly $3 million in a buyout and then give him a contract that fits what he envisions, all to figure out if he can play at the NBA level? Yeah, there's some risk attached to it. And you might say that, hey, it's only money and these owners make a bunch of money. It's also about, this is a business at the end of the day, and you can't just start throwing money around at these experiments. You know what I'm saying? Like, there has to be some understanding within an organization that you have to make good, quality, smart, educated business decisions. And, what it would cost to bring him over is something that every single NBA team really has to dig into and ask themselves, are we going to get some kind of return on our investment that's going to make it worth it for us? That's how business works.
And he'll be 29 during the 2024-2025 season. As you mentioned, Chris is getting a little older when it comes to the basketball world, but I think it's definitely something to talk about and think about going forward, because I don't know about you, but if the San Antonio Spurs were able to grab him and put him next to Wemby, ooh boy, that might be an interesting combination, along with Chris Paul and whoever else they might put on that team by the end of this offseason. But Chris, I wanted to
also might be a better situation for Yabusele.
True.
That's not a team with big expectations, right? That's not a team with a loaded depth chart. That's not a team with a rotation that is pretty much set to begin with. Like, that's the kind of organization that might have room for that guy to actually get playing time, to actually get consistent shot attempts, to actually get an opportunity. That's the thing. When you talk about the Cavs, Sam Merrill was having a hard time getting consistent minutes. Like, Isaac Okoro was getting bumped from the playoff rotation. He was seeing his minutes get trimmed. Those are NBA guys that have accomplished things at the NBA level that have a hard time on this team in this situation, either getting consistent playing time or playing time at all. Like, Craig Porter Jr. started on a two-way contract, right? He was undrafted. He starts on a two-way contract. He shows that he belongs in the NBA at some capacity. They move him off the two-way contract and give him a standard NBA deal, and he did some good things for the Cavs as a rookie. But, like, toward the end of the regular season, once Darius Garland was healthy and Karis LeVert and Donovan Mitchell and all those different things, the circumstances around his situation, when those things changed, like, the Cavs sent him down to the G League for a game, or they just put him at the end of the bench. You know what I'm saying? So, like, finding opportunities on this deep, talented roster is not the easiest thing in the world. Like, this isn't a trial ground here. This isn't somewhere where you can just be like, okay, we're in the middle of a rebuild. We're just going to throw a bunch of talent out there and, like, see who can hack it, see who can't, see who can be a core member of this team moving forward. Just let them play through their mistakes. Let them get meaningful game reps in meaningful game environments. Like, that's not the situation here. This is one of the better teams in the Eastern Conference. And I just don't know that this situation, if we're talking about from his perspective and him trying to get an opportunity and him trying to show if he belongs in the NBA or not, would he get that opportunity here?
I don't think so. It's a hard thing to sell, especially with this organization where they're trying to go and the amount of
Yeah.
space that we talked about already. But Chris, we're getting closer to the in-season tournament time, being able to figure out what the schedule's going to look like for the Cavs, and it's going to be announced today. This episode is going to air probably right around the same time, but I wanted to give a little tease. We'll probably talk about more so about what the schedule looks like tomorrow's podcast, but the in-season tournament is coming back. It's now named something completely different. The Emiratis NBA Cup, whatever it's called, man. I don't know what it's called, man. But
Emirates.
I'm not doing that. I'm not doing it. Anyway,
Emiratis. Sounds like, I don't know. Sounds like a gang from Fast and the Furious or something like that. A street gang from Fast and the Furious. The Emiratis.
Anyway, now we know that the Cavs are going to be in Eastern Group C. They'll face off against teams like the Boston Celtics, the Atlanta Hawks, the Washington Wizards, and the Chicago Bulls. They'll all play against 2 games against each team, I believe it is. And the Cavs also have their preseason schedule out. They're going to play 4 games before the season begins. Chris, obviously, the Cavs are going to meet up early on against a familiar foe when it comes to the preseason and the in-season tournament. Preseason, they get to match up with the Detroit Pistons and old former coach J.B. Bickerstaff. How do you think that is going to go, just knowing that these guys are going to get to see their old coach for the first time even before the season begins? And then them trying to get revenge on the Boston Celtics for knocking them out of the Eastern Conference semifinals in the in-season tournament.
All I hope for is that the in-season tournament has the flashy, ridiculous courts again. And they don't have to be as much of an eyesore as what they were, at least what some of them were. Let's put it that way. Some of them were more horrific than others. But I think that was logical, and I think that was a good thing for them to do, because that was your way of knowing, okay, this is an in-season tournament game with different kinds of stakes. If you're just like a casual NBA observer and you're sitting at a bar on a night in November and one of the TVs is playing one of the games and you see that court, those flashy courts, you're like, okay, this is different. There are more stakes here. This is the in-season tournament. So you have to have some kind of recognition beyond just the level of play, the intensity. If you're just a casual observer and you're tuning in and you want to know that it's an in-season tournament game, there has to be some way that you can know that, and they did it with the court. So I like that idea. Beyond that, I mean, I don't think the Cavs have a terrible draw or a terrible group when it comes to trying to win this in-season tournament, or, excuse me, the NBA Cup. It could be a lot more difficult, their pathway, anytime you're in any kind of group with the Detroit Pistons in the middle of a rebuild and a team coming off a terrible season. Obviously, they're probably going to be a little bit more competitive. They're probably going to be a little bit better defensively because JB Bickerstaff will demand that. And they added a few more veterans this offseason, so they don't just have to play a bunch of young players. So I do think Detroit's going to be a little bit better, but they're still one of the worst teams in the Eastern Conference. And if you're in a group alongside them and you get an opportunity to play them as one of your NBA Cup matches, then it certainly is a benefit to a team like the Cavs. Although, last year, I don't think a lot of people, when the draw came out and all of the groups came out, I don't think a lot of people were looking at the Cavs group saying, oh, look out for those Indiana Pacers. They might do some damage when it comes to the in-season tournament. But that's how it played out. They were a very good in-season tournament team. So you just kind of never know how the team is going to approach those things and how the team is going to be playing at that time of year. But it could certainly be a tougher draw for the Cavs. We'll put it that way, as nicely as we can.
Well, Chris, they played the Detroit Pistons in the preseason. They don't play them in the NBA Cup, unfortunately for the Cavs.
I thought they were in the same group as the Pistons in the NBA Cup.
Nope, they're in Group C, which is compiled of the Chicago Bulls, the Celtics, the Chicago Bulls, and the Atlanta Hawks.
And the Hawks. Okay, so the Bulls.
Yep.
So everything that I said about the Detroit Pistons, just copy and paste that and turn it into the Chicago Bulls. Because it's the same idea.
Yep. But now they do have to go through the Celtics. But
except for they don't have JV Bickerstaff.
Right.
Except they don't have as many young players. I don't think the Bulls are going to be a formidable foe when it comes to the Eastern Conference hierarchy this year. And if they are, that means something drastically either changed around the NBA or changed with the Chicago Bulls. It's a roster that doesn't make sense. It's an organization that hasn't made a lot of really good moves. They're on the treadmill to nowhere. So being in the group with the Bulls is favorable for the Cavs.
Well, this is just a little precursor, a little tease for you guys. We're going to talk a little bit more about this tomorrow on tomorrow's podcast. But for today's episode, we'll wrap everything up. But remember to become a Cavs Insider and interact with Chris and me by subscribing to Subtext. We'll hit you up when we find out what the schedule is for the Cavs in the NBA Cup this season. To get that information, sign up for a 14-day free trial or visit cleveland.com/Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word STOP. It's easy, but we can tell you that the people who sign up stick around because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from me and Chris. This isn't just our podcast, it's your podcast. And the only way to have your voice heard is through Subtext. Y'all be safe. We out.